Did you have a clarification or anything?
I had an important clarification. In the previous Q&A section, I dangled a modifier. You English majors will know what that means. I put the maybe in an ambiguous place. I do not at all and never have believed that rape includes cases of consent. I don't think that. If a woman is raped, that is by definition without consent, or without informed consent, or without sufficient consent. That is a consent issue. And so if that came across unclearly, here very clearly now, I am staunchly opposed to rape culture, and think we need to probably do more to rethink latent aspects of patriarchy in our culture that make it too easy for guys to get away with rape, because oftentimes it's a he said, she said type of allegation, and it's hard to prove. So we need to seriously evaluate how we can best prosecute this to reduce the cases of rape. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's we got stacks and stacks of. Let's start with Dr. Hermes. Can you give me? Can you give this person an example of a human who isn't a person besides an infant, which would beg the question: if we prefer the simpler claim, all humans are persons because of Occam's razor, isn't the burden of proof on the one who makes an exception, and the exceptions can't be arbitrary?
So remember what these two concepts are. To be a human being, the way I'm using the term at least, is to be a being that's got the sort that's a member of our species, right? A human being is an organism of our species. A person is the sort of thing that has some range of capacities, something like the ability to act for reasons, something like the ability to be morally accountable for our behavior, those sorts of things. When you're looking at cases like anosclephia, you've got this baby without the brain. And as the baby grows, you can keep looking at the same issue. You also get the issue in other cases of brain damage, but you've got to be careful here. So a lot of times when I'm talking about this, you start getting people, what about people in comas? Well, here's a tough thing. I've got no idea what's all going in this person's head during a coma. And what you don't want to think is you don't want to think that all action requires bodily motion. For example, if you're bored right now, you may actively imagine a sunny seaside resort, and you're doing something. You're still acting. So just because you can't move your body doesn't mean you can't act, and we can still have personhood in cases of people who are not mobile. Which is why what you want is you want the cases where you've got even more severe brain damage, which is why the anacelephic cases is one of the best cases to use, because you look at the anacelephic, well, there's no brain there. You don't have to anacephy. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing it. I'm getting our chair. Anacephy. Is this? How do I pronounce it? Anacephaly. So anencephaly. These kids. So that's what makes these cases good, is that you don't have to worry about the coma case. But you could use the coma case as long as what you do is you're specifying that these are the extreme cases you're looking at, not just because I know you're in a coma, the personhood's gone. But if what I have is enough sufficient brain damage that there's not enough going on there to ground those capacities, then you still clearly have a human organism, and that you lack a being with the relevant set of capacities.
And would you say there's at least a rough moral equivalency between having lost these capacities versus having the latent capacities and never being allowed to express them because an individual was killed first? Like genetically, an embryo has the latent capacity of full personhood. It's an acorn.
So what you could do is you could move off of personhood accounts and you could move to capacity accounts, right? Mm-hmm. But then you're going to have a different bag of problems, right? If you move to capacity accounts, yes, of course, the fetus has the capacity to grow into a person.
I said embryo, not fetus. I'm trying to pick the earliest stage.
So take the embryo. Of course the embryo has it, but that's not the earliest stage that has that capacity. The embryo, in the right context for a sufficient amount of time, is going to become a person. The sperm cell, in the right context for a sufficient period of time,
sperm cell or organism, in terms of organisms, does not have the capacity. But now we've got a different account. An embryo does.
But now we've got a different account. We can give up this capacity account and we can start moving to the life account, or when is a life. Well, that can't be enough, because then we've got all life. It's a human life. Well, that can't be enough, because then we've got the problem of anything. We want to be able to claim that other things, just because they aren't our species, could have the same, it would be wrong to kill them for the same reasons as us. So the problem is we've got all these different accounts we could point to. We could point to the humanness, and that's going to have problems. We can point to the personhood, and that's going to have problems. We can point to the capacity. We can try to mix them together, so capacity plus humanness, but that's just going to adopt the same problems. You're compounding problems. And I don't think the pro-choicer has a good answer here either. So it's not, I don't want to make it sound like, hey, look, one side just got the knockdown answer. This is a tough question, and we should respect it for it as such.
Okay. All right. Good. Fair enough. This one's for you. How is the Dred Scott Supreme Court ruling similar to Roe versus Wade? How does the ruling correlate to personhood?
Well, first off, let me say, as a general rule, I accept that the personhood argument can have great validity, great use. There's some powerful ways to use it. I generally avoid the personhood argument, as I did tonight. I think there's a lot of other reasons that can be brought up to show that the right to life, even if the child in utero could be shown to not be a person, I gave a case for why personhood isn't necessarily something we need to grant before we should still consider that individual as having a right to life. So personhood argument can have great value. I generally avoid it so that I can spend more time addressing a lot of the different challenges and problems with abortion practice, abortion policy, and so on. I think those are sufficient reason for backing away from a pro-choice position. Now, regarding Dred Scott, I think the idea is that human rights have been denied of human beings, often in terms of personhood, in the past. And I alluded to that in my opening statement, that we have erred on personhood issues. We have erred on human rights issues in the past, which should give us pause to take seriously the life bias premise, which I think everything hangs on this. If we recognize that if I don't know, if I don't at least have some reasonable, relevant degree of certainty given the circumstances, if I don't know that what it is that I'm shooting at, I shouldn't shoot. If it might be a rights-bearing individual sufficient to contest autonomy claims of another individual, an adult mother, then I shouldn't shoot. We should not pass a death sentence on a maybe. Okay. And in the case of the Dred Scott decision, that wasn't a death sentence, but it was very close to it because it bared upon slave rights, which everyone knows there's a lot of death that happened there too.
We have a lot of cards here. Did people want to do any questions with the mic, or did we want to just keep doing?
Actually, I think that was
Oh, yeah. Okay. Do what?
Yeah.
I'm Angelique's representative.
Oh, you are?
I'm so curious about this question.
Okay. Well, I'm going to knock out a few of these. If I don't get your question within the next 4 or 5 of these, then we'll just leave it up to the mic, I suppose, for time's sake. Dr. Ryan, if birth brings with it rights, what's so magical about the birth canal? It's not done. It's not done. I think that was
Right.
Clearly,
there's so many jokes we could crack here.
oh gosh, I shouldn't.
Everybody just shut up.
I'm just thinking it out.
Well, we still have one. We're not.
I think
We're
there's
actually
plenty of
not
reason
done.
to consider the birth canal very magical.
Okay, I think
Hold on. It's as messed up as this is. It's still not. The question's not done. Why then can a baby be killed with her head still in the mother in partial birth abortion? I don't think partial birth abortion was.
Is that even?
It's a
I don't
thing. That's
think
not
that's
even a
legal.
thing. That's not a thing.
I mean, maybe in cases of medical emergency where if,
Yeah,
but
that-
even then, I don't know
I'm
that
not sure about
that's
the
the case.
legality.
Well, I'm going to tell you all right now. It's not a thing. All right, so we're going to move on.
Okay.
Hey, this is for you too. We'll just give you a new one.
But the magic of the birth canal is a valid because what the question is really saying is what magical act has suddenly conferred the right to life on this organism because it's now outside of the mother's body, whereas before it was simply inside. And that's a really great question. I didn't get to sort of take my time to explain the details of what I'm thinking here. And the reason that I think the moral status, we might want to say, has changed is because it's no longer a threat to the moral rights of the mother once it's outside of the body. It's no longer a pregnancy. And I think that once that right, I believe the mother's rights to the use of to have procedures on her body of her choice trump the right to life, if there is such a thing of the fetus, because I don't think that that fetus actually has the right to life yet until it's actually taken into the moral community. But, so that's to answer the question. It's not a magic trick. What happens is that once the baby is born or removed or whatever, it's no longer, its existence is no longer a threat to the mother's rights, and therefore it has its own rights. It is now taken into the moral community, and in fact we are all responsible for the infant once it's outside, and is no longer attempting to trump the mother's rights, let's say.
Yeah.
The
So that's
birth
it.
baby
That's a
is a
very
member of
good
the
question.
public community, and so there's less question about whether they would be a member of.
Well, I want to say that up until
There's
the
a
point
partial
of
birth ban in
birth,
2000.
the mother's rights to the sanctity and the inviolability and the autonomy of her own body trumps any other right that we might want to confer. And especially because the fetus, if we wanted to confer it in virtue of its potentiality, well, we're putting up the rights of a potential being with the rights of an actual being here.
And I'd like
the
to-
mother is an actual being with actual rights.
I'd like to extend an olive branch and say that oftentimes anti-abortionists don't clearly demonstrate just how much they value the woman's autonomy. The
I think
woman's,
they don't take it into
yeah,
consideration
it
at all.
can get left out because it feels like, from speaking as a pro-lifer, it feels like there's a chronic tendency not to admit that this is a human individual that we're talking about and life and death. And so we can get sort of on a hobby horse and just talk about all of that and fail to recognize that there's a conflict of rights here. Now, how we adjudicate that conflict determines how we're pro-life or pro-choice or abolitionist or whatever, but there is a conflict of rights there that if this individual in utero has at least a potential or a possible right to life, as we see some you might say a seedling of that going on with the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, which says that if a pregnant mother is killed, then that murder can be charged on 2 counts of murder. So there's at least some precedent there that suggests that this individual in utero is valuable. Even for pro-choice
Well, let's
folks,
say there's a legal
they're not
precedent,
necessarily
but
denying that either.
It was my understanding we're talking about moral and not legal issues, and just because it's a legal precedent doesn't give it any moral weight, frankly. The moral, unless you want to equate. whatever's
I'm not
moral and
equating
immoral
legal and
with
moral.
What's
Yeah.
legal and illegal,
Yeah.
because I don't think we should.
I'm walking a fine line here because I'm a natural law theist and natural law tradition advocate,
I think what
and
we
I
can
don't
say
want
is
I don't want to
that
blur
someone
too much
has
here.
argued
Yeah.
that at conception the fetus has a right to life. Someone has argued that, and laws have been passed. Now, is it morally correct? We're discussing that here.
Maybe
We
not.
are
yeah.
having that difficult discussion.
See, I think it's a mistake to separate these two things as if they're different questions, though. Because if you're thinking about what we're talking about when we're talking about the right to life at the legal side, and we take serious that there are inalienable rights, then what we're saying when we're talking about what the real rights are to life has nothing to do with what the laws end up saying or what these judgments end up saying. Instead, these judgments are aiming at getting at what these inalienable rights are. So there's actually, I think what we want to the worry here is what we can think of is we can think of having 2 different conversations, right? Let's have this conversation about legality, and now let's have this question about morality as if the 2 aren't intertwined. But if you take the debate really seriously, what you need to be saying is it's legislative, judicial precedents. When you're looking at rights, if rights are inalienable, is only our guesses at what these things are that we're talking about now when we move to this ethical question. And then you're putting the cart before the horse when you say, look, people have made this judgment and we got this precedent. If the precedent's about inalienable rights, the precedent is about things that we have in virtue of, and then explain the what. And there's a
Legality
rounding
doesn't
word.
prove morality, but legality can suggest an important conversation that's had on an issue by smart people. For
As
example,
I said,
Justice,
it
yeah,
has been argued that.
yeah. Justice Blackmun, for example, in the Roe v. Wade decision, made an argument similar to yours, and dealt with a lot of philosophy there. Too.
I mean, there are a
And
lot
that
of
was a
laws
court
passed
precedent.
legalizing slavery and stuff, so I don't think we even want to go there. That's not,
right.
it's not relevant.
Right.
So,
It's-
Yeah, legality is not identical to morality, but we should. Anyway, I'll back. Yeah.
But the question, Steve, if
He's got
you're
another
asking a question about what the rights are, you're aiming towards a question that isn't settled by the law.
I
but settled
just
by
want to
different
raise this
conversation.
question of inalienable rights anyway.
Well, that
I just have a problem with that because I don't see. Yeah, I think, in many ways, we don't know what death brings. The inalienable right to life. Your inalienable right to life ends at, for me, my self-defense, let's say. Is it inalienable? I don't know about that. I think there are plenty of examples where we don't treat it as inalienable. And I don't happen to think that it's an intrinsic right. I think it's something that comes from, look, it comes from us living in a moral community. It comes from us having a moral sense. It comes from us thinking through moral issues. It comes from us taking each other into the moral community.
Your reference to moral community, does that run the risk of a form of relativism called conventionalism, that if a bunch of people agree on it as a community, therefore it's good? But that seems like might makes right, doesn't it?
No.
Or is that not what you're saying?
I'm not
Yeah.
saying
Okay.
that. I'm saying that what has a right to life is that which is part of the moral community. And it's
The
not...
convention of sorts.
it's- Yeah, but that is not the same thing as saying that whatever we agree on is right.
okay. So here's how this. Okay, I have one more question for you, and then all of this conversation that we've had, or several cards are actually about like loosely this. So I'm just throwing the card system away. So I don't see, and we'll use my mic after this. All right. I don't see how killing someone that isn't aware of itself is wrong. Try to prove me wrong.
Sleeping people have a right to life.
Did you say sleeping?
Sleeping people still have a right to life.
That's what I was going with.
That was, I knew it was your question.
But yeah, assuming that to never was and never will be. Like it's like a tree stump.
So repeat it again, now that I've got clarification on it. What's the...
Here, what? Say.
All right,
Yeah.
so like something that never was isn't. Yeah, we're pretty close.
Yeah.
All right, so something that never was is not and never will be aware of itself. So like something that's like a tree stump. I don't see how killing it is wrong.
Here's
Try to prove
a
me wrong.
curveball for you. Let's say there was a art gallery, and the last great work of this famous artist was still boxed up and in the back, and no one else had seen it. Now the artist had died; he passed away. It's the last great work of this artist. If there was a fire, all the other artworks we can account for. We know who's responsible for them. They're public. They're part of the aesthetic community, so to speak. And so we know that was a great loss because this was, a $1,000 piece. This was a $10,000 piece. This was the last El Greco or whatever. Has there been a great loss if that one that had never been made public was also destroyed?
All right, I see where you're trying to go with this. I'm going to disagree because, there's also the issue of the woman's autonomy.
Well, I'm suggesting a painting doesn't have autonomy and doesn't have self-awareness, but still has value that's worth protecting
You're saying,
by
the
the
value
aesthetic
of
community.
this is,
Yeah, so we've got an analogy.
There's this potential, but I would say that the real like autonomy that's at stake of the woman negates that like abstract.
Autonomy, I would suggest, is a weak basis for the most fundamental of rights to life. Although it's exactly the second one, so to speak. In that, hold on a second. I need to respond. It's exactly the second one in that famous triad: the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We could have pursuit of property and so on. Liberty is predicated. Liberty, an aspect of it being autonomy, is predicated on life. And that individual will never have a chance to express any choice, any autonomy, if it's taken from them. And we'll never know because we killed it first. And I would suggest that in those areas where we might be creating sort of a circular argument, like saying this individual doesn't have autonomy. Well, why? Because they got killed before they could express it. Or they were hampered so that we thought, for example, an embryo was going to be so severely handicapped that we thought that they'd only have a day or two to live, but we killed that individual in utero. I'd suggest that even in those cases, we're suggesting that the right to life discriminates on the basis of handicap. And so it's a discriminatory right. And I'm not prepared to say that. I at least think there's reasonable doubt regarding that.
Can I just get a clarificatory question here? So I'm not sure that a fetus has a right to life, but it doesn't have a right to life, but we're not sure that it does either. And so we have reasonable, doubt. Let's say that, I think there's enough reasonable doubt that it doesn't. And so, but you're insisting that you've shown that we have less reasons to believe that it doesn't.
Well, I suggested two premises which I think follow in refusing a pro-choice position. The life bias, which I think it has plenty of historic precedence among moral communities for the sake of issuing laws. Not that morality is legality, but morality is a great inspiration.
The life bias is if it's alive, it has a right to life.
The life bias being that we should grant. We should err in favor of life. We should give life the benefit of the doubt. Human life is the context here, too. And then I gave plenty of reasonable doubt to show that abortion choice policy, for example, death profiteering, animal abuse, sex-selective abortion, gender select or race-selective abortion, these are the kinds of things that suggest that it would be shocking to have these kinds of results to flow naturally from a really good, inspired, morally sound cause.
I think sex-based abortion or race-based abortion
We
flows
have,
in any way naturally from giving a woman a right to abortion.
Dr.
That's
Hermes,
a
give
speculation.
I want to get back to the
and
question.
we have people that.
Yeah,
there's. I'm going to have to moderate.
yeah.
So
We can talk after.
yeah. So Patterson, we have a question right here. What?
Can I answer? Because the question that was initially asked, I'd like to be able to give a response to it because I think there's something worth thinking about here.
Okay.
But here's what I think you should have said.
Okay.
Your first example for sleeping works perfectly well against the second case as well.
Okay.
So what you do is you take the sleeping agent. Suppose you've got me, I'm asleep. It's wrong to kill me, right? Now take somebody exactly intrinsically identical for me. Everything about that thing is exactly like me. But not only is it sleeping now, it's never been awoke. To shoot that thing seems like it's wrong for the exact same reason it's wrong to shoot me. Notice that thing was never conscious. It is not conscious. And given that you kill me, it never will be conscious. So it satisfies the conditions. It's never been conscious. It isn't conscious. It never will be conscious. And yet, because it's intrinsically identical to me, if I've got that right to life, it seems very bizarre to me to say that it doesn't too. So I think your sleeping case, I think, works just as well here.
Okay. Do you have?
Yeah, but like sleep implies like dreaming, and like the dream needs to be like when you
I sleep a lot
you are aware
more
of yourself because you're dreaming.
You're not necessarily dreaming
So I'm
for
not
the full
dreaming.
duration. We could refine it to say for that split second before dream.
Consciousness. How about that?
I think consciousness is tremendously valuable, but because we vary in degrees of consciousness, it's not a good grounds for equal rights, because we would then be unequally entitled to a right to life if we have unequal amounts of consciousness.
That's fantastic. We have some people that are right here. Want to ask a question? Are you standing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I probably don't need the mic.
Oh, okay. All right.
For
So-
recording purposes?
It's kind of a twofold question.
Is that for recording purposes? Okay,
Yeah.
we should use a mic.
Yeah, we
Can you hear me?
should use the mic for recording.
Do we get mine or?
Yes, please.
would be
That's
nice.
what I'm
Yes.
trying to. This system.
Oh, wow.
Okay, a new system has formed.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
David, are you good?
All right.
If you be concise in your questions, I'll try to be
okay.
concise in my answers.
Yeah, and let's be respectful of everyone's time and just move it and let's go.
Okay, so it's kind of a twofold question for each of you. Based on like your life bias argument, I know y'all are kind of arguing the black and white, but obviously there's shades of gray. So with the life bias argument, assuming we take your argument as true, are you willing to grant certain exceptions, and what does that do to your argument? And then kind of on the opposite end, from the autonomy perspective, are there certain exceptions where you would grant, where you would say, maybe there's more autonomy there, where we've reached a point where you would grant exceptions?
I can go first if you'd like to.
All right, yeah.
Okay. The question of exceptions, I think, is important because it shows that we're not simply being the kind of hardliners that aren't willing to think through the implications of what we're saying. Where you have a true dilemma of life versus life, I think the life bias isn't a simple, it's not going to be adequate because you have life biases going two ways and they kind of neutralize each other. So for those kinds of cases, I think at a legal and a practical level, it might not be realistic to have, say, an abolition of abortion in cases of rape. Now, I tend to think that the overall better scenario is still favors life in those cases, but I have to take that real carefully because that's a super loaded issue because you don't have consent anymore. But if, for example, a bill were passed tomorrow that abolished slavery in all cases except for imperiled pregnancies that endanger the mother and fatally, she's likely to die if she goes through with it, and then cases of rape, I'd support it. Because as a pro-life advocate, I want to save lives, mothers' lives and children's lives alike.
And so what I'm understanding is your question is asking me, are there cases where the right to life does trump autonomy?
Yes.
And so I guess I'm thinking of partial birth abortions, and I actually don't know what the legal status of those is. You say they're illegal.
I'm pretty
okay.
sure they're illegal.
Okay, so in that particular case, I'm a little conflicted. Let's say, and it's not because of the sanctity of life, frankly. It's because of the metaphysical issue. Again, I mean, the question is that once the fetus is outside of the body and it's no longer conflicting with the mother's rights. Now, there is something else here that I need to mention, which is consent, that has come up a lot in John's statements, where it seems to be that everything but rape is a matter of consent to become pregnant and to see a child through, whereas that's simply not the case. Now, having sex is not an automatic consent to become pregnant or to give one's body to carry a fetus through till birth. And we know enough about sexual politics, I think, to be very wary of saying, well, if the mother didn't take responsibility for contraception, then that's giving consent. Or that if the mother said yes, then no, then yes, then no, then that's giving consent to a pregnancy. And all sorts of other situations in between being, having a wonderfully happy, sexually liberated life and being raped. I mean, there's everything in between, and it's not just being raped where the woman doesn't give consent to being pregnant. Okay? It's merely having sex is not, even without contraception,
is not giving consent to a pregnancy. Okay, you can't draw the line there, because otherwise you have to take the argument that I gave about implanting the fetus in the womb into men and forcing them to go through with it without their consent if they want to continue having sex. Otherwise, they just have to stop having sex altogether. So I wanted to get that out because that had been bothering me, the issue of consent. But I'm sorry that kind of went over and above what you were asking me.
Oh, is this the chair we get to use?
That's the question chair.
All right. This is actually incredible. She asked the exact question I prepared, so I'm having to improvise now. You can actually see my card. I was going to bring up Hearst House. All right. So my question is now just directed to you. So you mentioned the life bias, and you also restrict it to humanity. And I was wondering why that would be biologically humans. And I was wondering why that would be the case, given, if we kill 150 billion animals a year for the sake of taste or clothes, it would seem like, you made the analogy to Pascal's wager. It would seem like if we reduce this to game theory terms, if those animals have any sort of rights at all, we are committing a crime more heinous than any that's really ever been committed for 150 billion beings a year. And I was wondering why the life bias doesn't seem to apply to them in the same way that it applies to...
A famous philosopher has coined the term speciesism, which this concept sort of denies any intrinsic or fundamental, or at least practically useful for the sake of legal policy, any clear distinction between humans and other animals. And that's a common view in some academic circles, to say that the only difference is going to be practical expressions, capacities, self-awareness, consciousness, things like that. And so Peter's following a similar line of argument suggests, for example, that abortion should be legal for some period of time after birth, because he denies any intrinsic right to life. He denies any intrinsic rights whatsoever. I think, and some of the more barbaric things, I don't want to do emotion baiting here. I'm trying to be conscientious of it, but I do have to be factual about some of the consequences if I think what those ideas can lead to. It's that he suggests sex with animals is permissible if there's consent, which is really unusual. No one else really goes with him on that. I don't, to my knowledge. But if we're talking about capacities and not any innate rights that trace to humanity as a distinctly valuable kind of thing, at least pertinent to the human moral community, which I am under the impression that's what we're talking about, the human moral community, then I think humans are distinctly valuable. Now, furthermore, I don't necessarily think we have to prove that to at least separate those concepts and say, when we're talking about the human moral community, or we're talking about moral rights, human rights as expressed in things like Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Declaration of Independence, John Locke, Thomas Paine, folks like that. We're talking about this human rights tradition. We're talking about human rights. Now, there is a great case to be made, and I want to dignify the heart behind this. There's a great case to be made for animal rights, for protecting and treating animals ethically, but we have to treat them in terms of their being. They are not humans. And those that say that we're all on a continuum, that's a case that they need to make for that side. Those that recognize, and I think the majority view, is that humans are distinct in an important moral way from the other animals. But that doesn't mean they're totally not important. We should try to avoid animal harms. We should try to avoid vegetarianism might have a good case to be made. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there's not any response, I'd like to thank you for having the difficult. Yeah, I'd like to have the. I just wanted to thank you for having a difficult conversation.
I love your questions. Every event.
So, I'm sorry to be putting all the heat on you right now. But I just wanted to get some clarification on a couple of things you said earlier that might seem more isolated and not at the heart of this issue. So in saying that a person can break or violate their right to life through criminal activity or by taking up arms against their nation, in saying that, aren't you implying that rights are are granted by the government and state power and not endowed by a creator or by nature?
Okay, great question. Great question. When you dig into the human rights literature, you can find entries in philosophy dictionaries on human rights. You can find it in ethics journals and such. They always mention these Universal Declaration of Human Rights, these legal types of documents. And let me make sure I'm not losing track. I didn't write your question down. They always mention these legal documents, and part of that is that even if we have these rights, there still needs to be legal effort or conventional effort to secure these rights. I understand that to be, according to the Declaration of Independence at least, the core job of the government, to secure these rights. It's not that they create them, but they secure them. Now, can we put ourselves in a position where the government cannot safely or responsibly or rightly protect that right, even if we have it? That's possible. That's at least logically possible that a person could go swim out into the middle of the Atlantic and get attacked by pirates. I mean, there's no government that can protect them because it's international waters. So it's possible to put ourselves beyond the reach of any governmental ability to secure these rights. But I feel like there's more to the question. I'm losing it in my head.
There's more than being not protected. There's having them taken away.
Okay. Another aspect you'll find in these when you do the research on it is there's not any consensus regarding the exact nature of this inalienable. A lot of folks want to grant it because we recognize the value of it, but you end up with practical things where can a person surrender their right to life by criminal action or warfare? Maybe they can't, but practically it's just indefensible anymore. Because if someone's raising a gun to shoot at me, they're about to take away my right to life, and I might shoot back. And so you have a practical thing that's no longer all that complicated philosophy. It's just a dilemma scenario where you cannot protect both at the same time.
Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Tristan.
Good question.
Hello. I have a question. Wrote it out. I hope I say this correctly. And I'm just going to make an analogy here. So if a person owned a building and they decided they wanted to blow it up because it was too hard to maintain, it was too much of a hassle to maintain, yet there might be a person on that property. You don't know. Someone could have wandered onto the property. You don't know. Should they have the right to blow it up since it's their property?
Who's the question directed to? It's me, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't agree with that as an analogy because whether or not there's a person on there is a question of whether or not there's something that has the right to life there. That's a risk, okay? With the fetus, we still haven't ascertained whether it has the right to life, and even if it did have them, it's potentially violating my rights not the rights of the owner of a building, but the rights of the owner of a body, and that's very different to owning a building. So I don't think I see what you're
Yes.
trying, the intuitions that you're, and appreciate the intuitions that you're trying to get hold of there, but I don't think the analogy holds concretely enough.
I'd like to affirm and
It's a good one,
qualify that. That's a really good question. When you're talking about physical property besides one's body, then there's a whole body of law and moral sense about how that works. But it becomes more special, in the legal sense, more sacred when we're talking about a human body. This person's autonomy over how they do that. So I think you have a valid argument, but I don't think it's a home run. I think it's more of a base hit.
Okay.
It's like saying we do have grounds for restraining a death sentence when there's reasonable doubt about it. So, like at city code, you'd have to declare you're about to demolish a building. You'd have to put up things around it. If you don't do that, then you are morally responsible for not telling people that, not telling the homeless people in the basement that you're about to demolish this the next day.
The more
You have
analogous
responsibility to that.
situation would be if there was the possibility that if I did destroy my building, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
If you did destroy your
That if there was, do I still have the right if I'm under threat by the possible being in there, the possible person in there, if some part of my rights are being threatened by the potential person in being, and it's not mere property rights. I think that really, John and I can agree there. That really reduces this question of a woman's rights to mere property. And let me add, it's hard to take the position that I'm taking without coming across as really sort of crass and hard and uncaring. But what I said at the beginning was that let's have some compassion for the woman as well. And it's not merely about inconvenience. It's not merely about property.
Okay.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think my question was for you, but I think I'm going to ask all three of y'all. I don't think you count. But
I don't have a right to answer.
well, nah, you do. But I was wondering, I'm from another country, and I believe in God, and I know a lot about rights coming from a country where people don't have a lot of rights. I was wondering if, do you believe, or y'all believe that it's ignorant for us as humanity, as far as like abortion, that was the only answer we could come up with? Like we couldn't come up with a better solution where the child is born and it can live a life without the mother or be adopted or whatever. Abortion was like the only decision we could make. Being a medical practice too, that's not even like.
Well, I think the issue would be totally different if we didn't have to impose the pregnancy and the bringing forth of life on the mother's body. So, if it were the case that it didn't have to, you see, it seems to be almost a bit of an accident of biology that it's the woman's body, that men can't do it. Why can't we, if it were the case that we could, in the Brave New World scenario, I don't know if you've read that book, but they do reproduce without having the mother having to have the baby in the womb. So they breed babies in test tubes. Now, if that were the case, then I don't think we would be having this discussion. There's no longer a question.
I'd counter and say if men could be responsible for carrying babies to term too, because I think it's a collective responsibility of humanity to try to protect our most defenseless members.
Okay, but I think that those responsibilities have to be tempered by the rights of the person. I don't think one should be forced to do it, let's say. I don't think one should be forced to undergo a physical procedure that one has not consented to.
I do believe we should be forced not to kill any other humans, but otherwise coercion, I think, very rarely should we be forced to do much of anything.
Yeah, sure.
It's not necessarily the case that the only people who can get pregnant and deliver babies are women.
Oh, I'm talking about biological sex. Yeah, that's all I mean. Yeah.
Right, yeah, that's a good point too.
Dr. Wolf.
So a question for Dr. Ferrer primarily. And it follows up on Dr. Hermes' mention of anencephalic children.
Sorry. Someone's got to correct my pronunciation.
That's okay.
It is a hard word, let's face it.
It is a hard word.
So,
Dr. Ferrer, do you think that anencephalic human fetuses have a right to life? And depending on how you answer, we're going to follow up.
Okay. I think all human individuals have a right to life on the basis that equal rights, as we generally understand it, must predicate on something that we have equally. And the only thing that we have equally is humanity, because we differ in pretty much every other aspect.
So
and that includes handicapped individuals, too, even people with severe handicap.
So anencephalic fetuses, 55% of them, I just looked at them, 55% of them that are not aborted are stillborn. And the prognosis is death, and there's no expectation that they'll never be, they're not conscious apparently, they'll never have any capacities. So you still think that we have to protect.
Let me see if
the
I can
right to life extends to them. You seem to say yes.
If you don't mind this, let me see if I can rephrase this as a rebuttal question. Are you suggesting that eugenic abortion is morally sound?
No, not eugenic.
And it doesn't even follow from
But-
what
Eugenic abortion.
Not eugenic abortion, but I'm talking specifically about anencephalic. The problem,
And
of course, is if you
that's a case of eugenic abortion. As
if you
it's
called it
defined
eugenic, I wouldn't call that eugenic abortion.
in the
but-
literature, when an individual is aborted because of some perceived defect, including any handicap from a cleft lip all the way to anencephaly, that's technically categorized as eugenic abortion. And given our ugly history since the 1930s with eugenics, I do not want to go there, and I would
Okay,
not
now
want
you're
my
just
name
kind of
to-
resting on that word. You're just resting on that word. So in
it's
this
a powerful
specific
word.
case, forget about that word. This specific case, doesn't anencephalic fetus
I don't think
have a right to
individuals
life?
should be killable
So
because...
yes. So your answer is
Let me
yes.
finish. Let me finish. I don't think individuals should be killable on the basis of disability or handicap.
So your answer is yes to that question.
I lost track of whether I'm saying
The question
yes or
is, do
no. have a negation in
anencephalic
there?
human fetuses have a right to life?
Yes, human fetuses have a right to life, disabled, black, white,
Even if they're
yellow.
anencephalic?
Yes.
They're not, so,
Humans have a right to life.
okay, do you recognize that that is a somewhat counterintuitive position? Even if you think that, even if you could hold a view that normally developing human fetuses do, and that anencephalic ones don't. You could hold that view. It's not logically inconsistent. But the problem is, it seems like you're hanging so much on just being human.
Part of the challenge we run there is it's playing God to decide how much of a chance at life should we allow other individuals to have. And I don't think that's a choice we have a right to make, because that individual that is alive, that's their life to keep and not our life to
Even if they don't have a brain?
There are cases of people who have had children with severe disability, including anencephaly, and they brought that child to term, and they loved on that child for the day or two that child was alive. And that was a magical moment, and that's a testimony to just how powerful it can be when we're willing to be inconvenienced and put out and harmed, even damaged, so that we don't have to distribute that to someone else. in
It
the
could
form of
equally
killing.
be an absolutely horrific thing for a person to undergo. So, but anyway, I'll stop.
I
So
think I answered your question.
But do you recognize at least that someone might think that's counterintuitive in the extreme?
Before Roe v. Wade in 1973, there were legal permissions in some states for abortion in cases of rape, mortal danger to the mother, and gross deformation that had to do with thalidomide, but it could include cases of anencephaly. So some people agree with you, but I don't grant
But
that it's wide scale enough to be considered broadly counterintuitive. For some people, sure, yeah.
It just means you're hanging a lot on biological humanness, and I might add, without much argument for it.
I would love to talk more. I've got more here if you'd like.
Hi.
Hi there. This is a question that relates actually to the mother, not so much the big societal question, but a mother. She's 12 weeks along. She sees a sonogram. It's very small, only 1.5 inches long, sitting in there sucking its thumb. Now, regardless of what view she may have had in the past, might that change her mind? Does it change her mind? What's she going to think? Is she going to say, there's a right to life there? Is it going to actually make her change her mind?
There's actually two questions here I think we need to keep in mind. One question is, does it make her change her mind? And the second question is should it make her change her mind? And I think when you get to the second question, the answer is clearly no, it shouldn't make her change her mind. And here's why. Because if she thinks what's grounding the right to life is the fact that it's a human, like John's view, then what she should recognize is that humanness was there for the moment of conception. Just basic biology would get it to her. So why is it that this picture makes a difference? It's not really evidence of anything that we don't already know, that there's an organism here. What it is it's a mode of appeal. So if this does get her to change her mind, it isn't because she understands the reasoning behind her position. John couldn't say it should make her change her mind, or he'd have to give up his humanist account. So I think everybody, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, should say it may make a very big psychological difference. These emotive pulls really do frequently cause us to behave in certain ways, but a lot of times we need to step back from that and ask ourselves, what are the reasons for this being right or wrong? And whether we're pro-life or pro-choice, what we ought to say is this is a very good emotive pull. When we try to make it mandated that people need to see these sort of sonograms, it can make a very big difference in how people will behave. But it can't have anything to do with the grounding of it.
There are a lot of abortion choice advocates that would consider themselves moderate, and they would allow a lot of restrictions, say in second trimester and third trimester. They're not necessarily taking the conventional American liberal version. It's more of a European version. And so for a lot of women, it is persuasive, but we're not really asking a question of persuasion. What does it take to persuade a person? I don't know that we can answer that except on a case-by-case basis. What would it take for you to be persuaded? What would it take for her to be persuaded?
And there's the unspoken, sort of content going on there. What are you doing if you're showing? I mean, let's turn this into talking about making it law that the mother has to see the sonogram, or even give her a little fetus to, a little model fetus to hold and see that how cute it is and how human it is. Should we do that? Well, should we be the whole question there is, let's make you feel guilty. Let's make you feel really crappily bad about what you're doing on the presumption that we've already decided that this has a right to life. And we're going to make you feel really bad for what you're doing, which is choosing yourself over it. Now, there's lots of other situations in which you're allowed to choose yourself over something else, if you're threatened or, if you've got self-defense, whatever, but not in this situation because it's cute.
Informed consent is probably the strongest argument you can make for that kind of thing, but I'm not making that case here. I'm not prepared to, because that's more of a policy issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
All right,
Yes.
fantastic. All right, yeah, a couple more.
Whew. Okay, thank you all for being here, by the way, because I know this is so crazy. Okay, first of all, I'm adopted. I was adopted from Guatemala. My mother loves me to death. But what I need you to understand is how lucky I am. So lucky. The scary thing is that I understand that life is beautiful. Don't get me wrong, I do. I'm going to try not to cry. And the beautiful thing is I'm not sad. I'm so happy. But the thing is, life can be so scary. So scary. And who helps us make our decisions from the moment we're born? Our parents. So my whole thing is, I'm not saying you have to decide. That's the beautiful thing. None of you. I'm saying it's a choice of a parent's. Because that's how scary life is. And the problem I think we have there is a lot of religions, and I'm not against anything like that, beautiful stuff, is that there's a sanctity of life, and I see that, and I get that, but at the same time, gosh, is life hard. And even being adopted, there's dangers. A lot of us have mental problems. The longer it takes for you to get adopted, the worse it gets. And the guy that said that left, you know what? I don't know. I just feel like a lot of these arguments, the thing is, to me, there isn't a right answer, is there? There never will be. And personally, I feel like there are other mistakes that have already been made. Perception, things like that. There are ways around this. And is that always the best answer? No. But at least we don't have to come to this decision. And personally, to me, that is why I think we'll never have a good answer for this. Because it is scary. It is so scary. So my question, I guess, is not, do you think it's right or wrong, but what makes it, and I don't mean this in a bad way to point at you or anything, but what gives you the right to decide that for my mother? What gives you the right to decide that for my father? Does that make sense, And I don't mean that in a bad way. I do, because I understand that you just wanted me to live.
It sounds like I'm playing God and telling women what to do with their body. That's
Exactly.
What it sounds like.
Can I make a quick comment before?
Please.
Part of what I think we need to be doing is recognizing that if we're going to make progress thinking through things, courageous communication is really important. And to speak from a position of vulnerability, to speak from a position where, you know, obviously you're drawing a lot of emotion is a very difficult thing to do. But I think a lot of times we're afraid to do that. And I just want to respect you and thank you for the courage that you're bringing forth.
And it's a really beautiful point that you're making too, which is becoming a parent is, you know, one of the most incredible things that you can do. And it's one of the most important things that you can do. And that's one, I think, another reason why it has to be very firmly chosen for something that you want to be, that your heart is in it, that you want to love this child, that you want it to have all of the things that you can possibly give it. And that's a big, important job to take on. And, you know, I mean, and it shouldn't be forced on anyone either, because it is so important.
Oh, can I, what's your name?
Zach.
Zach. I want to first affirm you are loved. I celebrate that your parents chose life. And I don't know what all you've been through. It sounds like it's been very hard. I don't want to feign sympathy when I haven't been there. But it sounds like you've been through a lot. And I congratulate you on that. Even if it's been a fight every step of it, I commend you for that. I'd suggest the adoption issue, oftentimes pro-lifers don't sufficiently address how rotten some of the adoption system is, how messed up foster care can be. And we treat it like it's some easy, safe option. I think it's a better option than death, but I'm not saying it's an easy, a pleasant one, and I'm not saying there's no room for improvement. It can be improved a lot. But we, as a moral community, I think we owe the most needy, most helpless, most endangered, most struggling individuals the most amount of grace. We owe them the greatest care to do what we can to make up for the piecemeal family that they didn't have before, but they're trying to make the most with what they got. So I don't think that there exists any right to kill any other human being outside of dilemma cases where someone's life is at stake. So that would be warfare contexts or self-defense. I don't know that that's ever been demonstrated to be a right. Although I fully affirm the woman's right to bodily autonomy, there's only one right more sacred than it, and that's the right to life. All the other rights are secondary. She has right of privacy over her body to do what she wants with her body, but if she's going to use her body in a way that's killing other human beings, even ones inside of her, I think that's a misuse of her bodily rights. Yeah.
So we have one
Thank
more
you.
question. Hey, Zach, was it? Zach? Yeah. Thank you so much, Zach.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you.
Okay, so hope this is a good question because it's the last, apparently. So you've talked a lot about the sovereignty a woman has over her body and autonomy. And there's a drug, and John mentioned it earlier, called thalidomide. And basically, this drug helps with morning sickness for a pregnant woman. So it helps her physically, but it's been proven to cause severe birth defects in the child. So my question is, if a woman has autonomy over her body, does she have the right to take thalidomide, even though it will cause birth defects in the child?
Obviously not. And nothing that I've said about her rights allows that to follow. She doesn't have a right to harm or kill anything, any organism that's been taken into the moral community. Okay, she has no right to harm or kill anything that has already got the right to life. Okay, she only has the right to decide that this organism is not going to be taken through to term, insofar as it has to be her body that does it. Okay, so she doesn't have a right to just harm something or kill something that already has rights. Okay, it's not about, and it's more than a convenience issue anyway. I mean, her right to the autonomy of her body and her choices is the right to have a child, to have a family. It's not the right to not feel sick, you know. So I guess that's my answer. I'm getting a bit tired, but I don't think that she has the right to do that simply because she feels sick.
So the
Okay.
inclusion into a moral community is the volition of the mothers.
Yes.
So if she wants the child, that child has a right to life. If she does not want that child does not.
Absolutely.
What if she wants to harm the child and then before she aborts the child? She
No.
doesn't want the child, but she wants to beat him up a little bit before
She
the
doesn't
abortion.
have a right to harm. She has a right to, no, she doesn't have a right to harm and then give birth and then try to give birth.
Oh, I'm
No.
saying to harm the child for the sake of harming a fellow human being because she's a sadist, and then she plans to finish it off with abortion.
No, obviously everybody disagrees with that. Nobody would think that there's anything similar there.
Yeah,
No.
I don't know anybody that would do that.
No.
But I'm saying that scenario illustrates, I think, a consistency claim there.
All right, so we're.
Thank you guys so much for your participation, for coming out tonight. We just want to give a big round of applause for our speakers. And also, they'll be here if you have any further questions. Thank you so much again for coming out, and we will see you on YouTube.
Thank you.